Senator Sue Shank, Representative Holloway, members of this committee, people in the audience. I am pleased that the General Assembly decided to study the Common Core. Why? Because I cannot think of anything that is more important to our state than our having our 1.5 million children educated well, so that once they leave our schools, we can have some assurance that they will be successful regardless of whether they go to the job market right out of high school, to our community colleges, or to a university. And so today, I want to just briefly share with you some places in the general statutes for which we have looked very carefully to make sure that we follow the laws of our state. Second, I want to share with you what is the focus of the Common Core standards, and also to give you a history of how we got to the Common Core standards, and then to share with you throughout my presentation some information that may have taken legs of its own, which would not be grounded in fact. First of all, as Dr. Pierce pointed out, we have had a standard course of study for a long time in North Carolina. I, as a teacher, had to deal with changes in the standard course of study when I was a teacher. And during my time as state superintendent and as a person working in education, I have had to deal with changes in standards. What always happens when we have a change in standards is that our teachers get anxious. Why do they get anxious? They get anxious because they want to do the very best job they can for students in our state. And so they have a doubt about, well, do I have all the materials that I need? Do I have all of the textbooks do I need? Do I need more professional development in order to implement these standards? So those types of questions have been a part of the conversation since I was a teacher in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, about am I ready for new standards? The other point that is really important to remember, and Senator Tillman mentioned the National Assessment of Education Progress. In your statutes, it does say that wherever possible that we are to align our standard course of study with the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And so that has been a part of our work since 1997. So a part of all the work, and this is just a review of some of the information that Dr. Pierce shared with you. But let me just give you someone asked me the other day when Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest and I were on a panel, just give us a 1-minute elevator speech about what are the Common Core standards. And the definition of the Common Core standards is this: it identifies what students should know and be able to do in mathematics and the English language arts as a result of being in our schools 185 days, 180 days, and 1,025 hours. And it identifies what students should know and be able to do by grade level. They focus on student success. And one of the questions that I've been asked frequently, well, are they field tested? Well, how do you go about field testing what students should know and be able to do? You do that by asking the people who will be the receivers of our students, our community colleges, our universities, our people in the workplace. What do we want them to know and be able to do? So as we look at the standards, as the Common Core standards, remember that they are necessary but not sufficient. I'll give you an example. In first grade, it was my teacher's job to teach me how to read all the Dick and Jane books and to pronounce all of those words. If I had not had a great teacher, that standard of being able to read all of the Dick and Jane books would have been just fine, but I would not have been able to do that had I not had Miss Foggy. So we remember that our standards just identify what students should know and be able to do, and they are necessary, but they're not sufficient to ensure that our students get the best education possible so that they can be successful. And they are a starting point for our teachers. It is a good thing, and I wish some of my professors along the way had the benefit of having some standards, because ever so often when I took a class, I didn't know what I was supposed to learn in that class. So the standards identify what students should learn as a result of being in that class, and it also identifies what what teachers should teach. We could have, as I said before, we could have the best standards in the world, but we would not be successful unless we had great teachers and we have willing students. They are just on a piece of paper. And we also know that they identify what a typical student should learn in that area. And I'm going to use an example from a lady from Craven County who has a wonderful grandson named Luke. And Luke is in the 1st grade. And Miss Murdoch, his grandmother, has said that he is a great reader, but he does not like fuzzy math. And he's a great reader, and his teacher recognizes that. And so what has his teacher done? She has given him an opportunity to go into the 2nd grade class in order to be in the class with 2nd graders. Why? Because he is well along the way of learning how to read as the standards point out for 1st graders. And he goes to the 2nd grade. Well, we have to say that they're a starting point, and without standards, his teacher would not necessarily know that he has already accomplished 1st grade reading and he needs to be in 2nd grade reading. So the standards are a place where we start what students should know and be able to do. And we have children with special needs. And as with any standards development, we always are concerned about our children with special needs and what additional assistance, accommodations will they need in order to be successful. So we want our students to have options upon graduation, and that's why it was extremely important during the adoption process that we were in touch, worked closely with our community colleges and our universities and our business community to help us identify what is important for people to be successful at the next level. And when you look at math, here's a summary. There are 9 major areas. Adding, multiplying, subtracting, dividing, fractions, percentages, decimals, algebra, geometry, and statistics. And I know that Representative Hurley was very concerned and wanted to make sure that students are able to memorize the multiplication tables and use those tables, use those in their work. It was also important, and the General Assembly passed a law that said we shall teach cursive writing. And they were added to the Common Core. And that is an example of how flexible we can be, or we are, because it was without a problem to focus on cursive writing. And that brings me back to the 15%. The 15% was identified in the very beginning about what you could add or not take away. It was identified so that a state would not say, I have adopted the Common Core standards and then changed them where it would have diluted the standards. And also another question has been asked about, well, what about copyright? Well, copyright means, with the standards as with anything else, is that you don't take those standards and take credit for those standards. Copyright means that you have to give credit to the authors or to the entity which developed those standards. Another major difference between the old and the new can be illustrated by an example that I used with Mr. and Mrs. Fink, who are in the audience, about our students need not only to know how to add, multiply, subtract, and divide, they need to know when to add, multiply, subtract, and divide. And so the new Common Core standards have a focus on application. For example, in going to Crabtree Valley Mall with my nephew John Robert, we could go to one store and it says, buy one, get another one for 50% off. The next store says, all items 25% off. Well, the question for him is, as his aunt, I would ask him, what is the better deal? Or are they the same deal, and under what circumstances? So it requires students to explain their work, not to guess, but to explain the work and to figure out how you get to an answer. So a really important part of the Common Core in mathematics and English language arts is to help students to know how to think and how to solve problems and how to make good decisions. In English language arts, you can summarize what they're all about by saying that they're about teaching reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And I remember one of the first times that I met Representative Pittman. He asked me, do we teach phonics anymore? Well, the Common Core Standards, because we know that that's research-based, does have a focus on phonics. Another part of the standard course of study, and we've been doing this since 1997, and we get a little better along the way, but the Common Core Standards in English Language Arts require students to read the classics, but it also requires them to read informational text, which means nonfiction. And you just think of your own lives about how much fiction you read compared to how much informational text you read. And so the National Assessment of Education Progress, which Senator Tillman mentioned, has a chart in the beginning, or the chart about the informational text and the balance is in the front of the Common Core Standards, and that will show you the balance that is recommended. So how did North Carolina get to the adoption of the standard course of study? First of all, in 1996-97, the General Assembly passed the ABCs. And when the General Assembly passed the ABCs, it had several things in mind. One is, we want to know how our students are doing in the basics of learning mathematics and English language arts. And two, we want to have some comparison between school districts in the state. And therefore, we got the ABCs. And that is where we started with testing in North Carolina. So the Common Core Standards did not create testing in North Carolina. North Carolina has had a testing program since 1997. And that testing program is not only required by the General Assembly, it is also required by No Child Left Behind, or ESEA, that we assess students' learning in 3 through 8 in reading and mathematics. And at the high school level, we assess what students learn in biology and in English 10 and in algebra. And we also have the ACT so that we can have a way to determine how our students are doing along with students around the United States. And of course, a big decision that will have to be made by the State Board of Education and subsequently the General Assembly is what will be our testing program in North Carolina. In 2006, the State Board of Education adopted Future Ready Goals, and in 2008, the State Board of Education appointed a commission. This commission's purpose was to study the standards that we had, to study the testing program, and to make recommendations to the State Board of Education. Those recommendations are on file and can be seen on our website or their archive, but one of the recommendations was that our standards are too wide, there are too many subjects, and we need to have deeper, richer instruction in the classroom. The other dealt with our being able to have a comparison of how our students are doing compared to students around the United States. So in 2008, that set North Carolina, the State Board of Education, its direction to the Department of Public Instruction was revise all of the standards from K through 12 in all subjects. So we started on that path of revising our math standards, our English language arts standards, our social studies standards, our healthful living standards, And then along the way, as you have heard Mr. Brickman say, in the 2009, there was a discussion about the Common Core. And when we compared our standards that we had developed a draft copy, and we looked at the Common Core standards, we saw very little difference from those standards. And then, once the State Board of Education adopted the standards in 2010, they also adopted all of the other standards. And then after that took place, we had an opportunity to apply for $400 million from Race to the Top. And in our proposal, you will see over and over and over a focus on we are going to use the Common Core. If you look at the request for proposal from the U.S. Department of Education, it says that each state, to be eligible, must adopt career and college-ready standards. And since we had gone through that process of changing all of our standards to the standard course of study, we use those as a reference. Now, who owns the copyright to all of this work? Each time that we have changed the standard course of study, the state of North Carolina has requested a copyright. Now that is in recent years. And so consequently with the Common Core, that standard, the people who helped develop it, the Chief State School Officers, of which I am a member, and the National Governors Association, copyrighted those materials, not to prevent someone adding to those materials or to those standards, but to ensure that no one said that these are the Common Core when they are not the Common Core. An example is, I wrote a textbook, Help with Computer and Business Careers. That book is copyrighted. Why? Because when it is cited, according to copyright law, my name, that book, has to be the reference. And that's the same thing with the standard, with the Common Core standards. Now the other thing is, what students are going to be assessed on when it comes to going to college or when it comes to the universities should not be a secret. And consequently, with the alignment of the Common Core standards with what is assessed on ACT, SAT, the National Assessment of Education Progress, that is very positive for our students and our parents, because it shouldn't be a mystery when it comes to a child wanting to be admitted to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill or NC State or North Carolina A&T to try to have to figure out what's going to be assessed on an SAT or an ACT. So that is a very positive component of the work. And this was just recently issued, and I think Senator Tillman mentioned this. How do we stack up with other nations? Well, in mathematics, we are ranked 11th in the nation when it comes to TIMS in mathematics. And that says to me that we've got a lot of, we have a good foundation in our state to implement the more rigorous standards in mathematics. But I want you to just pay attention to one statement. It says that PISA assesses complex mathematical thinking, and that the Common Core standards are a valuable tool in order to focus on that work. Now, the big question, why has the community college system, the University Board of Governors, the North Carolina Chamber, the North Carolina Business Committee for Education, Governor McCrory, and all of the people that Dr. Pierce recommended, why, and the PTA, why did they endorse the Common Core standards? They endorsed the Common Core standards because of a belief that these standards will contribute to the economic development in our state by our having a quality workforce. The developmental process I just mentioned, but We developed those career-ready standards that I just mentioned. We had multiple rounds of feedback from people across North Carolina. PTA was very helpful with our getting feedback. The North Carolina Committee on Business Education was very helpful. We had public comment. We worked with people in the communities of English language learners and students with disabilities. Thousands of North Carolina educators and stakeholders were involved. In fact, we have a notebook this high of all of the meetings we held, of the feedback we received. So in June of 2010, the Common Core standards were adopted. You've heard information about the federal mandate. Chairman Covey addressed that. Data collection. The important component about data collection, and it's very near and dear to my heart, since someone stole my bank account number without having my check, and someone has stolen my credit card number twice. I know how important it is for us to make sure that any data collection that we have is in a safe and secure environment. It requires any data that we are developing, any data collection is a part of ESEA and requirements of the General Assembly to date. The other thing about cost, and the big question here is, what if tomorrow someone said, we're going to eliminate the Common Core standards? Where would we be? Well, school districts have spent, from the Race to the Top dollars, $31 million for professional development and materials to help implement the Common Core that are in their second year of implementation. The state, through the Race to the Top, has spent $27 million. And this is what we have had for the professional development of our teachers since 2009, 2013. We've had 60 to 80 hours of professional development at the local level, developed by local people. The General Assembly allowed the State Board of Education to waive an extra 5 days if it could be shown that those days would be used in order to improve student achievement. All school districts, except perhaps 2, used those 5 days 1 year and then the next year. And so teachers who were in our schools in 2010 have received over 60 to 80 hours of instruction. We provided summer institutes, we have online resources, we have webinars, and we have had regional meetings. So North Carolina has invested in making sure that every child is successful, that they have options. And the investment we have made in our teachers to teach rigorous standards, to help them as part of that journey, really, from my estimation, will put North Carolina in even a better place where we can have greater student achievement and greater success for the 1.5 students who go to our schools every single day. So.
Thank you. If we could leave that slide up for a moment, I do have a question of clarification, if we could begin with that. When you say 60 to 80 hours, are you saying that each teacher, individual teacher, has received 60 to 80 hours of professional development on Common Core? Is that the statistic you're saying?
I'm saying that every teacher who was in our school districts and who is now as a part of our teaching force had the opportunity to have 60 to 80 hours of professional development as provided by the local school district. Each school district, except 2, sent us a waiver certifying or verifying that they would use those days to help teachers learn about the entire standard course of study, including social studies, healthful living, etc. And if a teacher came to the classroom after 2010, then they would not have had those same number of hours. It really is important to note that it is a journey in teaching. And there should always be the opportunity for professional development. And since our state did not have dollars and you had to make some very difficult choices, we have used race to the top dollars in the absence of any state dollars for professional development. And as with any implementation, I know that there may have been inconsistent implementation of those 60 to 80 hours.
All right, thank you. Senator Tillman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Madam Superintendent. You know, I like you.
And I really like you.
You're a feisty little bulldog, and you're a good salesman. But as Richard Petty says, there is a but coming. And I've got a couple of buts that I want to ask at least 2 questions. We talk about over-testing our kids. Common Core is adding more testing, less testing, or the same amount. And you don't have to tell me how to build a watch now. I want to know what time it is.
The time is that with the Common Core in English Language Arts and English Language Arts reading and math, we have fewer high school tests in mathematics dealing with the Common Core as a part of the ABCs or the accountability system than we did before the Common Core.
Total number is down or up?
Pardon?
Total number of tests.
For the accountability, down for high school, the same for elementary
Thank you.
and middle.
Thank you.
Senator Tillman, you have a follow-up.
Follow-up question. This committee can write legislation, and it's eligible for the short session. And Lord knows, I don't know what we're going to do, but I want to ask you a couple of questions. Let's list what ifs. We're going to have at least 3 more meetings. I don't know what will develop out of this. We're late in the game. We ought to have been doing this in 2010. We ought to have been doing this in 2010. But like the chamber and everybody else, we bought into it and passed the blooming bill. I had 50 senators one time sign a bill of mine that failed, so they didn't know what was in my bill. What I'm going to say now is if this committee were to come up with a new bill, and Common Core in my neck of the woods is poison language, it doesn't mean that that's the worst thing in the world, and it certainly doesn't mean it's going to be a panacea for making our kids learn more and know more either. It's not going to do either one necessarily. What I want to know is, if we name that thing like North Carolina standards, because I like state pride, I think we ought to brand North Carolina. We've bought into a national movement that's got some good standards, and some standards have rigor. Some are not great and age appropriate. Take the bad ones and throw them out and add our own, and have North Carolina standards. What if we were to do something like that? And then control our own curriculum. We get out from that copyright monkey if we call it North Carolina. I can't face voters at home if I call it Common Core anymore. I'm sorry, that's just me. What if something like that were to develop? Could you work with that and with us, or would you stand out there screaming on the corner?
Dr. Atkinson, please.
Senator Tillman, you know, I always like to work hand in hand with people to do the right things for our kids in our state. One thing that the state that could be done is to say that the standards for North Carolina shall be officially called the standard course, the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. That's number 1. Number 2, I have yet to meet a perfect standard. For example, in kindergarten it says count to 100 by ones and by tens. Well, there is another way to say that. So, anytime we have had standards, we have had a cycle of review. And it's important that you use that cycle of review. And that cycle of review in the past has gone like this. Implement the first year, that's what we did, 12-13. Implement the second year, that's 13-14. Third year, begin to have conversations with teachers across the state to say, okay, what is working and what is not working. Get the feedback from the teachers and start with year 3. Then year 4, expand that group to include more. Our parents, our business people to say, okay, let's examine these standards and see what needs to be changed. And then during the 5th year, we could go to the State Board of Education and ask for, here are some standards that would need to be changed if that is the case. Well, here's the problem. When you The problem of doing a change today is that we have to, you think of a business you think of the banking industry, and think of the banking industry going to computers. Now, this is a long time ago, but you think of that. You have to have professional development for all of your staff, our teachers in the state, in order for them to move forward. You have to have money, and we were fortunate enough to use Race to the Top to have a blitz of professional development for our teachers. The big question is, where will the money come from if we change these standards next year? Where will the money come from? Because one of the concerns that I hear over and over from our teachers, and I'm in classrooms practically every week, and they'll say, we want more professional development about this. We want more help with this. And we don't need to jerk around our teachers where they cannot have some stabilization of what students should know and be able to do as a result of the classrooms. And every time, and I've gone through this more times than I can count almost, what we're hearing are the same comments that we've heard in the past. So we have to be very deliberate, because we just can't say, let's change the standards and the next day and expect all people. But I think it's really important for my friends across North Carolina to read the standards. And when I've gotten emails, I have said, will you please send to me the standards that you believe should be changed? Because all of us, not all of us, many of us have an open mind to say, okay, what needs to be changed, and we can work toward making those changes.
Well, I don't know whether you said yes or no.
I was trying to say it depends, Senator Tillman.
Thank you. I've seen 3 questions, Senator Parman, Representative Brandon, and Representative Pittman. What I'd like to do is let's address those 3, then we have 20 more slides, and then any further questions after that, we'll have everyone present be able to answer that. So let's go ahead and move in that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Superintendent Atkinson, appreciate your presentation, but I have a resolution for my local LEA that has a lot of concerns about where the funds going to come from, continuation of technology, particularly in low-income areas, to make sure that these students have the same opportunities as other students. And they have a lot in this resolution, which I'm going to share with the chairman. But could you answer that question specifically? You talked about race to the top monies. Where are the additional resources for technology in low-income areas, professional development? How do we see that in the future?
The Winston-Salem Forsyth Board of Education was gracious enough to also share that resolution with us. I, like the Winston-Salem Board of Education, have concerns about the continued support of technology. It's really important to remember that regardless of which standards North Carolina has, we would have the same needs for technology. Because in that commission, we have recommended that we move to a digital environment. And if we had adopted the standards from Siberia, we would still have that problem. The General Assembly has passed the legislation dealing with digital learning. A part of that is to determine the educational needs, not educational needs, but the technology needs by school, by classroom. We are implementing that law, and we will have those costs for the General Assembly. However, we are looking beyond the General Assembly as a place of where we can meet those technology needs, including private partnerships, foundations, etc. And I believe that the date for having that information to you is over the next 9 months.
Representative Brandon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Atkinson, for your presentation. I just had a quick clarification question. You had stated in the process of getting here, when you looked at the Common Core standards versus the standards that we already had, they were very, very similar. Can you explain if our standards were very similar to the more rigorous standards, then why are we having such a discrepancy and such a bigger discrepancy than what you saw in terms of outcomes and test scores with the new testing that come in place? And what would you say would account for that if they were very similar?
Right.
Dr. Atkinson?
Please remember that this is, we have just finished 1 full year of the implementation of the new standards. And when you heard Mr. Brigman speak, he was talking about the standards that we had in the pipeline. I mean, not in the pipeline, but the standards that we were using. What I was talking about were the standards where we were revising those standards. And so we took that as affirmation that the Common Core standards and what North Carolinians have said that is important, our community college system, our universities, and our businesses, it was a confirmation or an affirmation that the Common Core standards were on target. The reason, or one of the reasons why we were very interested in adopting the Common Core standards is that we felt as if, as Mr. Brigman said, that we would have a greater influence on the materials that vendors develop, and that we would also have a way to compare our results if we tested the Common Core standards in North Carolina with other states.
Thank you, and Representative Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'm going to have to say is not so much asking questions, new questions, but at the end of what I'm saying, I will be, I guess, redirecting some old questions back to Dr. Atkinson.
Well, let me ask you at this point, do you think that would be most appropriate at this point or after we hear the last speaker, and then that would be kind of a general discussion for
Okay,
statements and things?
yeah, it'd probably be better. I'll be glad to defer to him.
All right, let's do that. We'll have you speak first after our last speaker. And Representative Horn, do you have something pertinent to this moment?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I just want, Dr. Atkinson, you mentioned to Senator Tillman that the number of tests at the high school level will, as a result of Common Core, be reduced, and the number, so I may have misunderstood. I just want to be very clear, because testing is a huge concern everywhere I go in the state.
What I intended to communicate, and I was trying to do my best to meet his rules of yes or no, what I tried to communicate is that regardless of whether we have the Common Core standards, or we have the standards from Virginia, or we have the standards from Columbia, wherever we have those standards, we have testing. And the testing, the Common Core standards do not drive the testing. The General Assembly and the U.S. Department and Congress have driven the testing. The U.S. Congress requires that we assess math, science, and English at the high school level. Before 2 sessions ago, North Carolina's General Assembly required us not only to assess those 3, but also to assess geometry, Algebra 2, and writing. Now, because of action of the General Assembly, we no longer assess writing. That would be now part of the Common Core. We do not assess Algebra 2. We do not assess geometry as a part of the accountability system. There is a North Carolina final exam that teachers are to use across the state, but that's a part of teacher effectiveness, not the standards. It's not a cause of the standards. Did that clarify?
It helps me understand better. What I got out of that is there are, in fact, as a result of Common Core, there aren't necessarily more or less, but sounds like we test an awful lot.
Yes, please.
It certainly is important to have that balance, but the engine of driving testing is not the Common Core. The engine of driving testing is the U.S. Congress and the General Assembly as to what are requirements.
I will allow Representative Speciale. I also saw a hand from the second row, but only committee members are permitted to ask questions at this forum. So we'll have Representative Speciale.
I'll hold mine to the end.
Okay. And Representative Holloway, please.
Thank you. Dr. Atkinson, I know on testing, and my ears raised up when we started talking about that, and you said the General Assembly. Now, I remember a few years ago, and it was actually my bill, that's why I remember it so well, we did away with every single test that the state required, and everything that was left behind was an act of No Child Left Behind in the U.S. Congress. So, again, I just wanted some clarification. Are there tests that maybe I overlooked that the General Assembly required, because I intended to get them all?
Okay.
Dr. Atkinson, please.
Representative Holloway, in the grading system of that was passed by the General Assembly, the A through F, there is a requirement at the high school level for algebra, English 10, and biology. And you can take credit for doing away with all those tests because they are also required by the U.S. Congress.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Can this wait, or is this?
It's a follow-up.
All right, go ahead and have a follow-up.
I'm confused by your answer because I'm a classroom teacher.
Right.
And with the development of the essential standards came along the development of what you're now calling common exams. They were called MSLs. They were called about 4 different things. In essence, the ultimate goal is to create a end of course, end of grade test that would apply to every class, every subject matter.
Dr. Atkinson, please.
Representative Elmore, in the essential standards includes arts, your area, it includes social studies. Another part of our work has been to assess teacher effectiveness. And teacher effectiveness has what you have just described, to have assessments, North Carolina final exams, to assess the growth of students in a classroom. My big point is that those assessments are not driven by the Common Core standards. They are driven by the teacher effectiveness growth clause in the General Assembly. Says it is our intent to measure teacher effectiveness by using student growth. And also, as a part of our ESEA waiver, No Child Left Behind, it requires us to have a teacher evaluation system. And that evaluation system includes student growth, which will be measured and can be measured in some cases, but not all subjects, such as art, to have a North Carolina final exam that will be used in every classroom in mathematics, English language arts, science, career technical education. That would be the same exam that teachers could use. We have yet to figure out, and we're working with people across the state about how you assess student growth in arts and healthful living, world languages, and we had some pilots. We did not get the results we wanted, so we are back at the drawing board in those areas.
This has generated some good conversation. We'll allow one more question, and this will be the final one before we conclude the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Atkinson. The question that I have concerns the professional development. So one of the charges of this committee is to try to figure out how much is this thing going to cost us. You said the teachers were supposed to submit waivers. Can you tell us how many participated in that? Maybe that'll give us a good idea of how much more professional development needs to be done in the rollout. I think that's something the committee should know.
Dr. Atkinson, please.
Okay. Again, this makes the second full year of using the Common Core standards and the essential standards making up the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. To date, we have spent $27 million and local school at the state level to provide those workshops. And then $31 million of the race to the top has been spent by local school districts. It is important that we have an ongoing support system for professional development for our teachers. And as we wind down Race to the Top, we will be able to give a better answer with greater detail about the ongoing professional development. There are 3 factors. One, the experience of the teachers, teacher turnover rate, all of those impact how much professional development that would be needed.
one follow-up.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to get at is how far did that 37 million, 27 million, how far did it go? If teachers had to submit waivers to receive this, what percentage received the training?
Dr. Atkinson?
Yes, each local board of education and the local superintendent submitted a waiver to say, instead of our children going to school an extra 5 days, we will use those days to do professional development about the new standard course of study. So theoretically, every teacher in the classroom in 2010 and 2011, if a local school district followed its affirmation that it sent to the department, would have provided 60 to 80 hours. We do know that it takes 60 to 80 hours to improve behavior. I don't mean improve behavior, but improve competence in a certain area. So the part of moving forward, we would need to make sure for our new teachers that we have sufficient resources to do 60 to 80 hours of professional development. And then for the teachers who are experienced, who feel comfortable, we would need much less amount of money to support that professional development.
Thank you, Dr. Atkinson. And if Dr. Garland would conclude this, we'd be appreciative.